Thank you so much for attending my PowerPoint presentation on every Bible translation explained and ranked. The Septuagint. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of the Bible, but the beginning of the Bible being translated incorrectly in ways that would echo through Western civilization for 2,000 years. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, produced between the 3rd and 1st centuries BC in Alexandria, Egypt. It is abbreviated LXX, the Roman numeral for 70, which is already wrong because the legend involves 72 scholars. Nobody caught that. The story goes that Ptolemy II summoned 72 Hebrew translators, had them work independently in separate cells, and they miraculously produced identical texts. The texts are not identical. The Septuagint is not even a single unified document. It is an eclectic collection of manuscripts from different scholars across different centuries, reconstructed by modern editors into something resembling coherence. The founding myth is contradicted by the document itself. It also introduced Christianity to the Red Sea. The Hebrew says Yam Suf, Reed Sea. The Septuagint said Red Sea. Christianity inherited that and has been printing it on maps ever since. The New Testament authors quoted it constantly. The word Christ comes directly from its Greek rendering of the Hebrew Messiah. The Eastern Orthodox Church still uses it today. The Jews abandoned it entirely once Christians adopted it. Next up is the translation that locked the Bible in Latin for 1,000 years, the Latin Vulgate. The word Vulgate comes from the Latin vulgus, meaning common people, same root as the word vulgar. Jerome's entire project was to produce a Bible in the language ordinary people actually spoke. Let that marinate for a second, because the church then used it exclusively for over 1,000 years, during which most ordinary people did not speak Latin. Pope Damasus I commissioned Jerome in 382 AD to sort out the chaos of competing Latin translations. Jerome spent 16 years on it, completed around 405 AD, and did something radical for the time. He translated the Old Testament directly from the original Hebrew rather than from the Septuagint. To do this, he consulted Jewish rabbis. Augustine of Hippo thought this was a terrible idea. The project had significant institutional pushback from people who found it suspicious that Jerome kept talking to Jews about what the Bible said. Jerome also noticed the apocryphal books weren't in the Hebrew canon and tried to exclude them. The church told him to include them anyway. He complied under protest and noted clearly in his prefaces which books he considered non-canonical. The church ignored those notes for 1,000 years. The Council of Trent officially declared it the only authentic Latin Bible in 1546. It remained the Catholic Church's official Bible until 1979. The version that circulated through the Middle Ages was also a corrupted form of Jerome's work, riddled with copyists' errors accumulated across centuries. Martin Luther quoted it throughout his life despite knowing Hebrew and Greek. Next up is the man who died, so you could read any of this in English. Tyndale's Bible. In 1408, the Constitutions of Oxford made it illegal to translate the Bible into English, punishable by death. Men and women were burned for teaching their children the Lord's Prayer in English. This is the environment William Tyndale worked in, and he decided to do it anyway. Tyndale was the first person to translate the Bible into English directly from the original Hebrew and Greek, and the first to print it. He fled to Germany in 1524, translated in hiding, and smuggled finished copies into England inside bales of cloth. Bishops bought up entire print runs specifically to burn them. They were inadvertently funding his next print run. His word choices were deliberate and politically explosive. He translated the Greek ecclesia as congregation instead of church. He used elder instead of priest and repent instead of do penance. Each of those choices quietly removed a structural support from the Catholic Church's claim to institutional authority. The clergy understood exactly what he was doing. He was betrayed by a man he considered a friend, arrested in Antwerp in 1535, strangled and burned at the stake on October 6, 1536. He was approximately 42 years old. Less than a year later, Henry VIII approved an English Bible that was nearly 70% Tyndale's work. The king apparently did not check. 90% of Tyndale's wording made it into the 1611 King James Version. 75% of it still appears in the Revised Standard Version. He was executed for heresy. His heresy is now the most printed text in human history. Next up is the Bible, a committee of 47 scholars spent 7 years producing, and which you probably have a copy of somewhere. King James Version. King James I did not commission a new Bible because he was particularly devout. He commissioned it because the Geneva Bible, the most popular English Bible of the time, had Calvinist margin notes he found politically inconvenient. A Bible with footnotes suggesting that obeying God sometimes outweighs obeying kings was not the Bible a king wanted in every home. So he ordered a new one without margin notes and got 47 scholars to produce it. Those scholars, divided across 6 committees at Westminster, Oxford, and Cambridge, spent 7 years on the project. They were not, by their own admission, writing a new translation. Their stated goal was to make a good one better. What they mostly did was refine Tyndale's work, elevate the prose rhythm, and produce something so literarily extraordinary that it has been called the only classic ever created by a committee. The cadence was deliberate. The language was already archaic in 1611, modeled on an older register of English to sound appropriately elevated and sacred. Words like let and prevent carry meanings opposite to their modern usage. Readers think they understand it. They frequently do not. A 1631 edition accidentally omitted the word not from the 7th commandment, instructing readers that they shall commit adultery. The printers were fined £300. The edition is now called the Wicked Bible and sells for significant money at auction. The version most people call the original King James Bible is the 1769 Oxford revision. The actual 1611 text looks substantially different. This fact upsets a specific category of person more than almost anything else you could tell them. It remains the most read Bible translation in America. Next up is the translation that caused people to literally burn Bibles over one word: Revised Standard Version. The RSV arrived in 1952 as the first major update to the King James tradition in half a century, produced by 38 ecumenical Christian groups over 15 years. It dropped thee and thou in modern usage, incorporated the latest manuscript scholarship, and landed just 5 years after the Dead Sea Scrolls discovery, which made the timing feel historically significant to basically everyone involved. Conservative Christians responded by burning copies. The specific problem was Isaiah 7:14. The Hebrew word alma means young woman. The RSV translated it as young woman because that is what the word means. The King James Version had translated it as virgin, following the Septuagint's Greek rendering Parthenos. The RSV, following the Hebrew instead of the Septuagint, read to many conservatives as an attack on the virgin birth, which is a doctrine found in the New Testament, not in Isaiah 7:14, but that distinction was not particularly calming in 1952. The RSV went on to become the standard Bible for academic and mainline Protestant use for decades. It also became the parent text of 2 competing revisions that disagreed about almost everything. The NRSV in 1989, favored by academics and ecumenical scholars, and the ESV in 2001, favored by conservative evangelicals. Both claimed to be improving it. Both were correcting different things. The RSV tried to please everyone. It pleased no one completely. This is the most honest outcome a Bible translation can achieve. Next up is the translation that italicizes its own uncertainties. New American Standard Bible. The Lockman Foundation published the NASB in 1971 with a stated mission that no translation would ever be personalized, no denominational bias, no interpretive agenda, just the text, rendered as literally as the English language could tolerate, at an 11th grade reading level, for people who wanted to know exactly what the original said, regardless of whether it was pleasant to read. The NASB italicizes words. Specifically, it italicizes any word added by translators for English clarity that has no direct equivalent in the source text. Every other major translation makes these additions silently. The NASB shows its work. This is either the most academically honest gesture in the history of Bible translation or the most effective way to make scripture feel like a doctoral thesis, depending on your priorities. It preserves verb tenses and syntactical structures from the Greek and Hebrew that other translations quietly smooth over in the interest of readability. The result is accurate in ways that occasionally produce sentences no English speaker would naturally construct. Critics call it wooden. Proponents call those critics people who prefer comfort to precision. Both are correct. The 1977 edition addressed God as thee and thou. This was dropped in 1995. The 2020 revision updated it further. Scholars who had memorized the 1995 edition were briefly inconvenienced. Bill Johnson of Bethel Church uses the NASB for serious study while endorsing the Passion Translation for devotional reading. We will get to the Passion Translation. Set aside some time. Next up is the best-selling English Bible in the world, which somehow makes everyone unhappy. English Standard Version. The ESV was published in 2001 by Crossway as a conservative evangelical revision of the 1971 RSV. The translators changed approximately 6% of the RSV's wording. 6%. The volume of theological commentary this generated is difficult to overstate. The stated philosophy is essentially literal, a position deliberately staked between the NASB's strict word-for-word approach and the NIV's thought-for-thought flexibility. It seeks word-for-word correspondence with the original languages while accounting for differences in grammar and idiom between ancient Hebrew and Greek and modern English. The result reads at a 10th grade level, is cleaner than the NASB, and carries the literary elegance inherited from the RSV tradition going back through this KJV all the way to Tyndale. The translation committee was composed entirely of conservative evangelical scholars and pastors, which critics note affected certain word choices. A few passages have been identified where the Greek does not clearly support the rendering selected. Scholars outside the evangelical tradition have pointed to what one described as evangelical trump cards inserted at theologically sensitive moments. No cardinal doctrine hinges on these. They exist nonetheless. The ESV retained traditional gender-specific language. Brothers stays brothers, not brothers and sisters. This was the primary point of differentiation from the NRSV, its sibling revision of the same RSV source text, and it remains the argument that reliably breaks out whenever the two translations are compared in any seminary context. Within roughly a decade, the ESV had largely replaced the NASB as the preferred Bible in Reformed and evangelical churches for preaching and reading. The NASB retained its position for close textual study. Both camps consider their choice correct. Next up is the translation designed for people who find all of the above too complicated. New Living Translation, the NLT has an interesting origin. Kenneth Taylor published the Living Bible in 1971, which was a paraphrase of the American Standard Version written in plain modern English. It sold enormously. It also drew criticism for being one man's interpretive rendering, rather than a proper translation from original languages. Tyndale House responded by assembling 90 scholars to produce a genuine retranslation from the Hebrew and Greek, published in 1996 as the New Living Translation. It reads at a 6th grade level. The NLT sits further along the dynamic equivalent spectrum than the NIV. Idioms are rendered entirely for meaning. Sentence structures are rebuilt wholesale when a literal rendering would confuse a modern reader. The stated goal was to increase precision without sacrificing accessibility, which is a sentence that means different things depending on whether you are a biblical scholar or a person who just wants to understand what they are reading. Scholars praise its clarity and criticize its sacrifice of nuance. It is widely used in children's Bibles, hospital ministries, and outreach programs. The Canadian Gideons chose it for distribution in hotels, hospitals, and prisons. It currently sits at number 3 on evangelical bestseller lists. Critics frequently describe it as trending toward paraphrase in practice while technically maintaining translation status, which is a distinction that NLT's target audience does not find particularly urgent. The NLT is what you hand someone who says they have tried to read the Bible but cannot understand it. It is a genuinely useful thing to exist. It is also, quietly, what you hand someone when you have given up explaining the difference between formal and dynamic equivalence. Next up is the Bible that abandoned the concept of equivalence entirely. The Message. Eugene Peterson did not want to do this. A NAV Press editor had read his paraphrase of Galatians in a 1982 devotional book and spent 8 years trying to convince him to do the whole Bible. Peterson finally agreed, translated 4 chapters of Matthew, decided it was awful, and nearly stopped. He described his early attempts as wooden, stilted, and contrived. Then he skipped to the Sermon on the Mount just to have fun, and found his voice. The full New Testament was published in 1993. The complete Bible followed in 2002. The stated goal was to present the Bible in contemporary idiom, capturing the original emotional register rather than the formal structure. Peterson worked from the original Hebrew and Greek. The original edition had no verse numbers, designed to read like a novel rather than a reference document. It uses American street slang throughout, which makes it vivid to American readers and occasionally bewildering to everyone else. Scholars classify it as a paraphrase. NavPress marketed it as a translation. Most critics consider this distinction important. Peterson said all translation involves paraphrase and declined to find the argument interesting. The Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6 includes the phrase as above, so below. This phrase does not appear in the Greek text. It is a Hermetic expression with roots in ancient occult philosophy, widely used in New Age circles. Peterson put it in the Lord's Prayer. This has been noted. Bono called Peterson a poet and a scholar. Prisoners wrote to him in phonetic script saying they could read the Bible for the first time. Both of these things are true simultaneously. Bible Gateway removed it from their platform in January 2022 without public explanation. Peterson had died in 2018 and was unavailable for comment. Next up is the translation that decided the solution to all of this was more words. The Amplified Bible. Frances Seward was born in 1881, spent her life studying Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, and died in 1967, having conceived and driven the production of one of the most unusual translation projects in biblical history. The New Testament alone took over 20,000 hours of research. The complete Amplified Bible was published in 1965 by Zondervan and the Lockman Foundation, the same organization that produced the NASB, which tells you something about the intended audience. The premise is straightforward. No single English word fully captures the range of meaning in the original Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek. The word pistuo, for instance, which almost every translation renders simply as believe, actually carries the weight of adhering to, trusting in, and relying upon. The Amplified Bible puts all of that inside the verse, in brackets, immediately following the word. Every verse, throughout the entire Bible, the system uses brackets for word definitions, parentheses for contextual clarification, and italics for additional theological or historical information. A sentence that runs 10 words in every other translation routinely runs 40 or more in the Amplified. The text is technically readable with or without the amplifications, though reading without them requires deliberately skipping large portions of every verse, which is its own experience. Biblical scholars have raised a legitimate concern called illegitimate totality transfer, a term coined by James Barr, which describes the error of applying every possible meaning of a word to a single instance regardless of context. The Amplified does this systematically. A word meaning one specific thing in a given passage gets expanded to include meanings it does not carry in that passage. Whether this illuminates or confuses depends entirely on the reader. It was designed as a second Bible, a study companion alongside a primary translation. It is beloved in charismatic and Pentecostal circles by people who want Greek and Hebrew nuance without learning Greek or Hebrew. This is a reasonable thing to want. Next up is the translation that makes the Amplified look restrained, the Passion Translation. In 2009, Brian Simmons says Jesus visited his room, breathed on him, commissioned him to produce a new Bible translation, and gave him supernatural downloads of the Hebrew language. Simmons had previously worked as a missionary translator in Panama, holds a doctorate from Wagner Leadership Institute, which is an unaccredited institution, and is the sole translator of the entire project. Most major Bible translations involve committees of dozens to over 100 credentialed scholars working across years of peer review. The Passion Translation has Brian Simmons. The publisher describes it as a translation from original languages. Scholars overwhelmingly classify it as a paraphrase and not a careful one. The text is at least 50% longer than the source material due to insertions. Andrew G. Shedd, an Oxford-trained theologian and member of the NIV Translation Committee, reviewed it and concluded it no longer counts as scripture, writing that Simmons achieved his goals by abandoning all interest in textual accuracy and inserting so much new material that the result is a strongly sectarian text rather than a Bible. Galatians 2:19 adds the phrase heaven's freedom where no such phrase exists in the Greek. The Lord's Prayer includes as above, so below, the same Hermetic phrase that appeared in the Message, which is not in the Greek text of either translation. Simmons has also stated that Jesus showed him a 22nd chapter of John that does not appear in any known manuscript. This has not been incorporated yet. Bible Gateway removed the Passion Translation from its platform in January 2022. Simmons described this as cancel culture in the church world. Broad Street Publishing acknowledged the removal and noted that Bible Gateway has the right to make decisions as they see fit. The TPT remains available on YouVersion and Logos. It continues to sell. In conclusion, Bible translation is a 2,300-year argument about what words mean, conducted at varying levels of competence and occasionally at gunpoint, and you should absolutely read it. If you enjoyed this PowerPoint presentation, I made others, and you should absolutely check them out. Peace on planet Earth.